Vols are taking an assistant coach. We're going to break them both down right now. Linebackers coach William Inge. Now, on the surface, I don't expect you to know if he's a great recruiter, if he's a great assistant coach, or any of that. If he has aspirations of being a head coach, if he's a real up and comer, or if he's happy being an assistant. What I will tell you, though, is he was reportedly headed to Alabama, where he'd reunite with Kalen DeBoer. So this goes back to my contention that everything is burning down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and the future will determine whether or not I'm right, Caleb, and whether or not that's a good hire. But as for right now, can you possibly imagine 4 years ago, a coach making this move, vice versa? Tennessee in total disarray. The University of Alabama is in the middle of one of the greatest championships in sports history. And now here we are 4 years later, where Inge turns down the University of Alabama and goes to the University of Tennessee instead. That says a lot, my friend.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. I was bullish on it more yesterday. And I wanted to know your take on your read on this, though. Could it be possible that he's just salty about the fact that he's getting a demotion at Alabama because he was a defensive coordinator at Washington and Fresno State, and then Kalen DeBoer went and hired 2 co-defensive coordinators, and neither one of them was him? And so could it be the fact that he's salty that he's getting a demotion, so he decided to up and leave? Or would you still stay at Alabama for your future?
Sure. But he could also be salty that they just blew everything up at Washington. He could be salty about the fact that he knows a lot of his guys that he's going to coach at Alabama that are future NFL stars could go elsewhere. I mean, there are a lot of things to get salty about, but if you go back 4 years ago, I don't care if you're salty or not about the way you might have been handled by then head Alabama coach Nick Saban. He just hired people willy-nilly and would let them go or make them an analyst if he didn't like them. Now Tennessee's pulling them from Alabama. So I think it's significant regardless if he felt jilted by DeBoer. And he probably did. I mean, DeBoer has had to replace his replacements on 2 or 3 different occasions.
Yeah, that's where I was going too. And so I think it's half and half. I think you're right. I think he's a little salty that he was demoted, but if this were 4 years ago, he may have been salty he was demoted, but he still would have stayed at Alabama and not gone to Tennessee, right?
Probably going to have an Alabama like a tattoo on his shoulder because the programs were in such different places. Now, he's had coaching stops at Iowa, Northern Iowa, Colorado, San Diego State, Cincinnati, University of Buffalo, Buffalo Bills, and Indiana. I'm a firm believer that recruiting is a relationship business. If you know how to build relationships, you'll be successful. But I will say this, that list doesn't exactly blow me away as far as places that he has recruited. Rick Terry Jewelry Design will blow you away with their jewelry. Looking for affordable game day jewelry? How about the Fire Opals, the Tennessee tradition? RickTerryJewelry.com, RickTerryJewelry.com. So it's not like he's got a Garner type of list where he's been at Auburn and all these other places where you would expect great ties in the South. That being said, it's not to say that he can't do it.
No, he can absolutely do it. I think that, and I think we talked about this a while ago, inside linebackers is kind of a position you do want them coaching up guys a little bit. And I think, look, a lot of people are so obsessed with the SEC ties in recruiting. Yes, you need guys on your staff with SEC ties, but you need guys. You don't need everybody on your staff to have SEC ties. And I think that's really, really overrated when you really think about it. I mean, I think you need, I don't know, 4 or 5 guys. Jeremy Pruitt had the most SEC tied staff of all time. Derek Dooley had a pretty SEC tied staff. And how'd that work out? Couldn't even get Von Bell out of Chattanooga.
Yeah, I think it really depends. I would like to have SEC ties as opposed to not. Wouldn't you prefer not? And I'm not just talking.
How many SEC ties did Nick Saban have before he took over at LSU?
None, but I'd have to go back and look at his coaching staff. I would have to look at his coaching staff to see what ties. No, but I agree with you. I think it's a relationship type business. Really, the schools that I would most want to have coaching ties, and it's not to the individual high school coaches and recruiters, it's to I would like to have a coaching tie that I coached with somebody at Georgia, who somebody calls me and just says, "Hey, here's the deal with this guy at Georgia. We don't think we're good enough, but we're going to tell you that he's good enough to play for you." Those are the kinds of ties I would like to have, so you can pick up some high 3-star to low 4-star guys maybe Georgia doesn't want.
Well, the other underrated part, though, is people need to remember this. Just because a person coached at a school, that does not necessarily mean that's where their recruiting ties were. Schools have you responsible for recruiting different areas. So, I mean, just to throw this out there, when Tennessee hired Lane Kiffin in 2009, whatever you want to think about him, everybody thought California ties. Well, guess what? When Lane Kiffin was at USC, he was responsible for recruiting Florida, right? So guess what he had? A lot of Florida ties. And so I think that, just because a guy coached at Indiana doesn't mean he wasn't recruiting the South. And I think that's something. I don't think the school you're coaching at is as big of a deal as where you have been responsible for recruiting, if you want to talk ties to a region.
I'll tell you what, you want my thoughts, Caleb? It's the most important thing is how whoever the coach is, in this case is Inge, meshes with Banks. I think that's what you wanted. If he can mesh with Banks, then that may just be doing everything that he says to do in the beginning, Caleb. But you gotta mesh with Banks, right?
Oh, I agree. I have a conspiratorial question, and you can tell me if I'm crazy. Do you think part of the reason Tennessee went for Inge was specifically to get the narrative out there that they hired a guy away from Alabama?
No, I don't think people do that sort of thing as often as you do. I think that it doesn't hurt that that's a little bonus. I think you pat.
I mean, I covered Butch Jones, who was obsessed with narrative, so that's where I get these stories. So
that's true. That's true. That's a very good possibility. My question is this: is Tennessee in a better position at linebackers coach now with Inge than they were with Jean-Marie? I can't really answer that question at this point. And I think it's just key that he steps in and he's a really, really good recruiter. He replaces Brian Jean-Marie. I think a lot of that defensive front is handled by Rodney Garner and to some extent defensive coordinator Tim Banks. I think you just absolutely need to be a dogged recruiter. And don't forget, this is new defensive assistant coach. This is the first one hired under Josh Heupel since he assembled his original staff. So you got to make sure that Tim Banks knows what he's doing, because I was told that Tim Banks called the shots in getting Inge on board, and you don't want to start off your first project as the head coach is seeing if you can do this to not doing a good job at that.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And let's be fair, William Inge has experience as a defensive coordinator in the past, and he's actually coached special teams. And I think there's a little bit of variety there. I think that, there is some importance to having another guy on your staff that can that has coordinating experience that could help Tim Banks out a little bit. I think that, I think the other part that'll help his experience is going up against Kalen DeBoer's offense so much that he is going to be used to coaching complementary football to tempo and the spread and things like that, which is kind of a big deal. And again, I think schematically, your defensive backs coach, your defensive coordinator, and your inside linebackers coach are the three most important coaches on your defensive staff that help develop the scheme, right? I love Rodney Garner. I don't think he develops any scheme. He teaches his guys how to leverage, and then he recruits. Is that fair to say?
Yes. No, I think it's completely fair to say.
Yeah, and Mike Eckler barely coaches. He tells his guys to run after the quarterback. And so I think your inside line, there's not a lot of, okay, I guess there's some stunts up front that the defensive line does. That's fair to say. But for the, that's, you rush around this edge instead of this edge. We make it sound very sophisticated when we say stunts, right? It's really, you run this way or this way.
No, I think I think it's a little more complicated than that, but I do think that it's going to be up to Tim Banks in year number one to make sure the messages are conveyed. I don't think you're just going to hand it off to a new linebackers coach in year number one.
Well, yeah, I'm not Well, yeah, I was debating in my head about what Rodney Garner coaches a defensive line, though. I'm talking about stunts by the defensive line. I don't think those stunts are that complicated. It's, you either rush around the edge or you rush up the middle or you loop. I don't think there's or you delay your rush. There's not there's not like 3 or 4 different things you could do as a defensive lineman on a play, and that's about it.